Welcome to Funemployed. I'm James Daly, and on this channel I talk with self-employed creatives from all over the world, hear their stories, how they work, how they got started, how they make their money, and their advice for others. In this video, I'm talking with Jeremy Blaze, a product designer and maker from Melbourne, Australia. He works with clients on a freelance basis from all over the world while also working on his own projects and digital products. These range from an API-based screenshot platform all the way to co-founding a company to help restaurants and cafes with QR-based digital menus and a check-in system to help with COVID-19. Really interesting hearing his story. Check it out.
As I'm sure you have a similar problem, which is you don't fit very well into any single job title. But I call myself a product designer, which is, I guess, my trade. Which is, a blend of UI, UX design and a bit of product strategy. I do work pretty much exclusively with startups, with a little bit of e-commerce and a few web design jobs thrown in there. It's probably the best explanation. I do also do web development, so that's a whole other thing. I don't really advertise that to clients much.
What were you doing beforehand? Were you working in-house, or were you was it a traditional 9 to 5? Did you start out freelance and move to this right now? What was the before times?
So I started fiddling with websites in high school. My dad actually works in IT, and he bought both me and my sister domain names and set us up really basic websites when I was something like 10. And I never got into it, I didn't get into it then for a couple of years, and then I just started tinkering. And that led me to making templates for an application called Rapid Weaver, which was like a popular Mac web design tool at the time. I don't know if it's especially well used anymore. And that got me learning code. So from there, I got a Dribble invite, which was pretty exciting because I'd as soon as I got into it, I got really into the design side, and I started just going on Dribble multiple times a day, looking at what everyone was doing, and I got pretty obsessed with it. And then when someone gave me an invite, that led me to my first client job, which was a school holiday thing for an agency in Melbourne. And it sort of just snowballed from there. So after I finished school, I enrolled in a computer science degree because my biggest, or what I thought was my biggest shortcoming there was I wasn't able to build my own products. I wanted to be able to build anything I sort of came up with. So I actually just wanted to learn iOS development, which I still haven't learned. But I ended up leaving that degree after a semester. And I was going to go and freelance, but then I got a job offer at a really cool company where I worked for a couple of years, which was it was a tech startup, 6 people, fully remote, all in Australia, sort of along the East Coast, but fully remote distributed team. And yeah, that was a really great experience. And I sort of kept freelancing while I was working there. And when I finished up there, I just went full into freelancing, and that's the story. That's it.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really cool that you got like a Dribble invite so early on in all of that. Like, I remember when you get that invite the first time, you're like, oh my goodness, this is real now.
Yeah.
I'm a designer now.
Yeah.
And then now, of course, you're like, oh, Dribble, I check that every day.
Exactly. I barely ever use it, and I think I post once a year or something. But at the time, it was really exciting. And I do have to genuinely credit a big chunk of my career. There have sort of been a few key people along the way. One of them being my dad, who originally got me started. Then Simon, who gave me that first client gig. Then Jamie, Mike, who are a couple of the guys at that first company I worked at. And they and a few others have sort of been key people along the way who referred work to me at times. And they sort of referred work to me, and then the people they referred to me then referred more work to me. I don't do any marketing or referral business, which is probably terrible, but it all sort of just snowballed from those first few connections.
You went freelance after that first job. How did you do any preparation before you went freelance, or you said you were already freelancing at the time? Was that kind of
what
kind of preparation did you do?
Yeah, this is the funny thing. I never did any of this stuff actively. Looking back, I can sort of see little things that I might have done along the way. But I was at that company for about 2 years, and I'd always, through that entire time, I was doing random freelance gigs. But in the second year, I went a lot more seriously into that. That was when I started building Endpose, which was one of the first little product businesses I actually built and launched. So I did a lot of moonlighting when I was at that job, basically, which was helped significantly by the fact that they were a remote company. So I didn't have any commutes. We didn't necessarily work 8-hour days every day either. It was sort of, once the work was done, that was it. What we called a results-only work environment, which was a really big opportunity looking back, which I don't think I realized at the time. That's also when I did a year of like the digital nomad thing when I was working at that company. So,
what was that jump point like? Once you'd done your preparation, you were working in that job finished, freelance started. What was that? That day, that week, that couple of weeks like? Was it scary? Was it easy? Was it natural? What was that immediate jump point?
It was a little bit scary. I'd been intending for a couple of months to go freelance, and I sort of told the CEO of the company that was the case. And when I actually submitted my letter of resignation and made it official, I was leaving. I was going full-time freelance. That was definitely a scary moment because I was looking at the bank account and working out burn rates almost because I was still doing my digital nomading thing there. So I was a little bit scared I'd get stranded in Vietnam or something stupid. But
where were you when you resigned?
I think
I
was actually in Melbourne at the time. I came back pretty regularly during that year, just for a couple of weeks at a time. But I think I was actually in Melbourne. But I came back to Melbourne for 2 weeks between Canada and Vietnam, and that was when I finalized everything. I had to hand it I had a company laptop. I had to handle all that while I was in town. So I did all of that, and then got on a plane to Vietnam, and I was officially freelance. But one really good thing about that was I had such a good relationship with this company that I continued freelancing with them for another 6 months or so. So they weren't necessarily a major client, but they were sort of always there. I always had a little bit of work there, so it was a little bit of a security blanket in that way.
It kind of eases that transition a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's there was no hard and fast break. I stopped working for them officially full time, but the day after, I got a message from Mike saying, "Could you do this?" And I did that.
So you're freelancing at that point. How did you learn the business side of freelancing, managing your own income, managing bank accounts, taxes, client management, outreach? Did it come naturally to you, or was it a bit of something you had to pick up?
Definitely didn't come naturally. I'm entirely ready to admit I'm not especially good with money. There's a history in my family of being not especially good with money as well. It's not that I'm especially careless. No, it probably is that I'm especially careless. I'm not good at planning ahead, and I'm always optimistic with what I'm going to earn and optimistic with how little I'm going to spend, when you should be doing the complete opposite of both of those things. So I don't think I was really comfortable freelancing until maybe a year and a half or so ago. So I think if I'm getting the timeline right, I've been freelancing full time for about 4 years. So that means it took me probably the best part of 2 years to get to the point where I would have been happy to take on a lease, that sort of thing, and be confident that I'm not going to have a couple of months of no income. So it did take a while for me to get to that point. I'm going to do a plug for an application, if you don't mind, which is a really significant thing for my accounts. Was an application called Rounded, which I still use, which is an accounting platform built specifically for Australian freelancers. And that just made all of the financial sides so much easier and clearer. I was able to clearly see an automatic chart of my income, expenses. It actually got me to start looking at profit rather than just income. And I was doing strange things at the time where I was ignoring the fact that GST counts towards my revenue, and in some places that you look, but it's not actually your money, so you can't really make plans with that money. There was little mistakes like that, little things like that application just made me a lot better at noticing things like how much tax I'd be obliged to pay, doing all of that. So that was a really important thing for me.
What's the best thing about being self-employed? What's your favorite thing?
Flexibility, ability to spend your day however you like. Really, obviously, got to work, but I think for the most part, freelancers, especially in our industry, don't have a problem with I don't have a huge problem with motivation. I have to try hard to not work. So the whole I speak to a lot of friends who are like, how do you get in the zone? How do you actually sit at your desk and do work? Why wouldn't you just spend your entire day doing not work things, going to cafes and walking the dog, doing all that sort of stuff, when it's never been an issue because I just like working too much. Does that? I've completely forgotten what the actual question was now.
No, that answers it well. You're saying the flexibility and freedom,
Yeah.
but it sounds like your answer is also being able to do something you'd be doing anyway you love. You'd be doing that for fun anyway, building things, tinkering.
I would be, yeah. Just the nice thing is, if at 11 a.m. a friend says, do you want to go and get a coffee? I go and get a coffee. I go for lunchtime runs, which you can't do if you have a 9-to-5 job. I'm also, like, I get up at 6 a.m. every day. I start work at 6:30. Again, not going to work if in a 9-to-5. I just find that I work better in the mornings. And then I often don't work in the afternoon, and I'll start up again in the evening after dinner. So it's just being able to work when you feel like it is a really big asset, and that's not to be confused with not working at all.
What's the worst thing or the hardest thing about being self-employed?
I think two things, both sort of related. The first is financial stress to some extent, which even though I'm a lot more comfortable than I was a couple of years ago now, there's still, I think, always that fear. I was chatting with a client of mine, Hugh, who runs a SaaS business. He's based in Melbourne as well. And he was saying that founders seem to have this feast or famine mindset where you're on a high for a couple of months because you think you're just doing so well and you're in love with everything. And then you'll have one little setback and you'll start thinking, oh my God, my business is going to fail. And it almost never does, but that fear just seems to keep coming around every little while. I think that's a real thing. And a couple of years ago when I had a small slump, it was actually really bad because I don't believe in the whole work-life balance thing. I think there's just life. I've never been one to try and divide work and life all that much. It's just do what you want a little bit, which is part of the whole flexibility thing. But when work gets difficult, it affects everything else. So if you start getting stressed about work, other things start to take a bit of a hit. Personal relationships, things like that. You'll start going a bit crazy about work if you're stressed about how many clients you've got in the pipeline, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, you'll have spent 2 weeks as a hermit in your house, working like crazy, and you'll have not spoken to anyone, which has definitely happened on a couple of occasions. It's never been a massive issue, but I think it's not to be underestimated the impact that running a business or running a freelance business has on other parts of your life when you have all of the stresses of finding work. You're running the entire business. It's not like you've got a job where that part of operating business, finding new work, is often a little bit out of sight or happens behind a curtain. So when that's your responsibility, there's a whole pile of stress that sort of comes with that.
What's been the high point of your self-employed career? Is it somewhere you've been able to travel? Is it a business milestone? What's something that stood out that made you think this is like worth all the stress?
It's really tricky to answer. I don't know that I've had the high point yet. That's my slightly facetious answer. I don't think I can point to any single moment that was like a high point of freelance life or anything like that. I'm generally thankful for having the flexibility to spend my time how I like. I'm overall just grateful for that every day. There are certain times when that's been when I've been especially grateful of that, but it's something I'm constantly I think about.
All right, so we touched on this very slightly when you were talking about when you start work, but what's your typical work day? What's your schedule for when you're working on a work day? What do you do?
Yeah, changes a lot. I go through months of doing one thing and then I'll completely change it up. Not necessarily intentionally, it just happens to change. at the moment, I'm doing a wake up at 6, start working at 6:30, and try and cram in as much as I possibly can before midday. And after that, I slack off a little bit, or I allow myself a little bit more freedom. I typically do a midday run, just because I have a terrible issue with afternoon slumps, and I find that helps a lot. Probably has something to do with the caffeine intake, but that's a whole other discussion. Yeah, so sort of start working at 6:30, and I've worked pretty steadily up until midday. After that lunchtime run, walk the dog, go get lunch. I might go and visit someone in the afternoon, and if it worked for COVID, and then dinner, and I'll start working again around then. Normally, I'm a little bit of a night owl as well, so I can start working again in the evening.
If you could give your past self some advice to kind of make the journey you've gone through, self-employment, freelance journey, easier, what advice would you give to your past self?
Probably a couple of things. I don't have great advice on this sort of stuff, or I don't have a great point of view on this sort of stuff, because everything was sort of a natural progression. So I don't necessarily have any massive regrets. I think a couple of them were I was/am always nervous about charging people, which makes absolutely no sense. But following up on invoices is something I don't love doing when people pay invoices over time. And that being said, I have pretty strict terms on invoices, which is a bit of advice I got a few years ago, which was fantastic. I bill every 2 weeks, and there's 5 days to pay the invoice until it's marked overdue, which for a lot of people seems to mean nothing. But that the whole charging for your time thing took me a while to wrap my head around. That was definitely one. Another was pitching and selling myself is still something that doesn't come very easily. And I think I've gotten better at it, but it's still not something I love. At the same time, I also hate really hardcore pitches. I was procuring an SEO agency for a client not too long ago, and some of the calls I had with these agencies were ridiculous. They were just, I told them what our rough budget was, and they said their minimum project size was double that every month, and I was like, it's just not going to work. But I kept on getting follow-up emails, and they're like, do you want to book in another call in a week so we can have another talk? And I'm like, I'd love to, if I could afford it, I'd love to, but it is just so far out of our price range. And anyway, I hate that sort of thing. But yeah, it's having those sort of initial sales calls I don't really love. Cold calling and cold emailing is something I've done occasionally, but again, never really felt great about it, even though I haven't actually made a couple of sales through it. But yeah, I think not being afraid to charge for your time, and being a little bit strict about the fact that if people want your skills, then those are worth something. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest.
All right. So what's next? What are you working on at the moment? What are some goals that you might want to share? Any future projects, any future products?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm by and large just freelancing. So I'm enjoying that. I've got a couple of good product clients that I'm working with on really fun projects. One of them's one of them I can't talk about, and the other one's a project management tool / marketplace for the architecture and design industry. So we're basically trying to build the Figma for interior designers, essentially, which isn't an analogy that would work for any other audience, but here I reckon that probably makes sense. Currently that entire industry runs out of Excel. We're trying to build a much more streamlined process for that. When I say architecture and design, I'm talking interior designers at major companies with 100 plus designers who have to work with construction companies, that entire range of the industry, and they're all running their project roadmaps and things out of Excel spreadsheets, basically. So all the procurement for, if you imagine a skyscraper in the city, just imagine trying to order all the tap fittings for that. And now think about the fact that you've got to do that. You've got to do all the door handles. Then you've got to do the couches in the lobby. It's all of that sort of stuff, all the light surrounds. So purchasing all of that, dealing with the suppliers for that, and then getting it installed is like a really big job. And when it goes wrong, it's lots and lots of money at stake. So we're sort of trying to streamline that industry, as well as providing a place for suppliers to advertise products and designers to find them. So we're trying to sort of bring those two parts of their workflow together. So that one's a lot of fun. We just launched that in June. They're currently doing a seed round or Series A. They're trying to raise some funds. Then we're going to do a whole bunch more work, building out e-commerce capabilities, a whole lot of stuff. That's a great fun project. In terms of personal projects, I in March or something partnered with a good friend of mine, Bella, to start a QR code check-in business for hospitality. So it's a coronavirus thing. So we're sort of ticking along on that. It's not a big earner or a big venture, and I think its end is coming. with South Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria all talking about having government mandated QR technology that'll basically kill our business, which we knew would happen, but I think that's probably not far off. But that's been a lot of fun, because it's been a couple of years since I've run a product business, and it's great fun. We've got something like 60 clients or thereabouts, which has been really refreshing to do product work again rather than all the client stuff, which I also love, but I think I much prefer running a product business.
What resources could you recommend that have helped you on your journey? Could be books, could be blogs that you follow, YouTube videos, people that you follow their tweets of, what helped you learn and grow?
So I've mentioned Rounded, which is a fantastic thing specifically for Australians, so it's probably almost useless if you're watching this from overseas. But I still use it for doing all my accounting. It means you can submit your quarterly returns, the statements in about 5 minutes flat. It automatically follows up to clients if they don't pay invoices, that sort of thing. Pulls in your bank feed so you can log expenses. It just makes the whole business side really, really quick, really organized, and you can feel comfortable that all is ticking along as it should, and there's no glaring errors hiding in the dark. In terms of resources for learning, there's honestly too many to mention. I'm not a big podcast person, although I do listen to a few. I've listened to audiobooks almost non-stop though. Most of the business books. So one of the best in terms of the business side of things is a book called The Personal MBA, which I'm pretty sure is by Josh Kaufman or Josh Kaufman. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. It is what it says in the title. It basically goes through in a really fun, concise, memorable way what you would do, what you would learn if you went and did Masters of Business Administration. And I'm not about to claim that I now essentially have an MBA, but it gives you a high level overview of a lot of principles, which allows you to then dive deeper into what you want to learn more about. I think I've recommended that to a few people who have wanted to start businesses and just don't know about so many things. It just gets you 10% on the way on a whole bunch of subjects, which is sort of enough to get the ball rolling. So that was a great one. Another one is a fairly new book. I think it came out last year, or it might have been the year before, which is Company of One, which I think, do you know who that's by? I can't actually remember.
It's just there on my bookshelf. Paul Jarvis.
Excellent. Yeah, Paul Jarvis. And that's a fantastic book. I mostly just loved it because it was entirely speaking my language.
I actually haven't read it yet. I still need to read it. It's just there on my shelf.
Well,
so it's good that you recommend it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good book. It's somewhat philosophical, discussing why we do business. It does go into a lot more depth than that, but fantastic book, and I think it just appealed to my confirmation bias quite a bit. I can't fault it.
Great, that's awesome. I need to check out Personal MBA. I haven't heard of that one before. That sounds really good.
It's a good one. Josh Kaufman has a couple of good books. He's got I think another one is The First 20 Hours, or The First 24 Hours, where um, he has this theory, or someone has this theory, which he tries to prove that the first 20 hours of any subject is enough to get you sort of past the point of knowing nothing to the point where you now know a bit about it that you can decide whether you want to take it further, or it gets you past the pain points. You know how you're starting anything new, it's awful for the first little while. The theory is that if you push through by just 20 hours on virtually any subject matter, that will be enough to get you past that point where it's still awful. So he does things like windsurfing. Like he does a few others, but that's a good example in that no one who gets onto a windsurfing board for 2 hours is going to be able to stand up. Um,
But the point is, you get to that point, and then you're basically a windsurfer. Whether you're good or not is
exactly,
debatable,
yeah.
but you're doing it.
Exactly, yeah. So there's no doubt that you wouldn't be very good, but you'd be able to say that you can do it. And that's sort of the point. And that was a really interesting book as well. I don't know that I recommend it for this audience particularly, but it was an interesting read. There's one other book I want to plug, which is called Make Time. And again, I can't remember who wrote this one, so I'll send you some links so you can put them in a description. But it's a great book for discussing time management and working out productivity hacks for yourself, getting to understand when you work best, under what conditions you work best. One of the authors goes to the point of almost split testing his workflow. So he had a spreadsheet charting his productivity, and I don't remember how he did it, but then one day he'd change something and see if that altered his overall output, that sort of thing, which is appealed to the time management geek in me. But yeah, that was a really valuable read. Just I think it's important to think about a lot more about how you manage your time, because it's a low-hanging fruit. It's a really small win. If you can better manage your time, it means you can output significantly more, and it really doesn't take that much effort to better manage yourself.
I need that book. I very much need that book. That sounds great. I got 2 books on my shopping list. Thank you for that. Cool. The very last question, it's not really a question, is where can people follow you and find you? Where's the best place to keep up with what you work on?
Yeah. Twitter's probably the best place. I'm Mr. Jeremy Blaze everywhere. I'm fairly active on Twitter. Very occasionally post an Instagram story or LinkedIn. I post businessy updates. I do have a couple of sort of personal projects which will be coming out hopefully early next year, which will all be Twitter based. So if anyone wants to follow along on that sort of thing, Twitter's the place.